Hello, all of my history-loving friends. Welcome to the historical world of Madame Morbid. This channel is about history, and there is only one rule. Every person that I profile in my channel must be dead. If you like what you see today, please subscribe to my channel. Please hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that this is a good episode that they should show to other people. Please make comments. I love discussion. Today we continue the series on Jack the Ripper's victims. Today, I will be talking about victim number 4, Catherine Eddowes. Kate was born in Wolverhampton, England on April 14th, 1842. Her father worked in the tin plate industry. He was very active in the union, the Friendly Society of the United Operative Tin Plate Workers of Wolverhampton. They met in a local pub. They always planned ahead for a strike. The union in Wolverhampton was pretty organized, so everybody put in a set amount of money each week toward a strike fund so that they would all be supported if they decided to go on strike. Evidently, her father was a pretty big leadership role in this group. And all of these workers, because there were a lot of tin plate manufacturers in Wolverhampton, they all got together and they put together a book of rates of pay that they believed was fair. And they convinced almost everybody in town to participate in this except one very anti-union shop run by Edward Perry. And this just happens to be where Kate's father, George, was working. So there was a strike and it got nasty. Edward Perry was a nasty guy when it came to unionized workers. He used spies. He used putting people in prison. He used foreign workers to come in and take their jobs. Intimidation, death threats, anything that he could use, he did. A lot of the workers were sent to London to protect them. Edward Perry found out, and so he hired detectives, spies, a network of informants to track each and every one of them down and send them to jail. The sentence was about 2 weeks, but every time there would be a trial for one of these guys, all kinds of people would gather outside the courthouse and jeer and taunt Edward Perry as he came in to testify against his workers. Kate's dad and his brother William were both involved in this, and there was a reward put out for Kate's father. And it was just too good for people to pass up, and somebody turned him in. And George, Kate's father, ended up doing 2 months as one of the main organizers of this strike. Now that this is said and done, he does his time. Apparently he does it very happily. He believes he's doing the right thing. But his time working in Wolverhampton is over. He moves his entire family, which includes 6 children under the age of 10. They take a barge and they move to London for him to take a job there in the capital. George gets a really good job, actually, as a skilled mechanic at Perkins and Sharpus. It's a copper and tin manufacturer north of London Bridge. If you only have, say, 3 kids, it is a very good wage that is going to support your family in comfort. However, they start out with 6. And as the years go by, that turns into 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. 12 times her mother Catherine gives birth. Only 10 of those children will survive to adulthood. Despite how good her father's pay is, it isn't when you are feeding 10 kids. As soon as one gets old enough to move out and be on their own, another one is born. And to top it all off, the eldest child, Alfred, I'm not exactly sure what is wrong with him, but he is handicapped in some way. He does have seizures. So her mother has never really been able to work. And as other children are born, the older ones, usually her sisters Harriet or Emma, care for Alfred and any other very young baby that is born. Some of the children are able to go to school, and Kate is one of them. Sadly for her older siblings, this isn't true. Harriet and Emma were both illiterate. We know that because they signed an X on their marriage certificates. But there was a charity school near St. Paul's Cathedral called the Dowgate School, and Kate was able to go to this. They taught the children the basic reading, writing, math, but they also taught them industries for getting jobs later in life. She would have been, as a girl, she would have been trained in the domestic arts to become a servant. She was in the school until about the age of 14. That was considered basically graduation age. She may have had to leave a little early, though, due to her mother beginning to show signs of illness in 1855. She developed a cough, a fever that never got better, and eventually her health deteriorated very rapidly. She grew thin. She starts coughing up blood. Clearly she has consumption. Her father had to continue sleeping next to his sick wife because they had 10 to 12 people living in 3 rooms. He really didn't have anywhere else to go. In November of 1855, Catherine dies. About a year and a half after his wife dies, George starts to get sick as well. And the family starts to plan immediately for him being gone. The older daughters get married. Alfred and the 3 youngest children are sent to the workhouse as orphans. And Kate goes to Wolverhampton to live with her Uncle William and her Aunt Elizabeth, Eddowes. They get her a job in one of the tin plants, working at Old Hall. It was this giant mansion that had been turned into a tin factory. Her father and uncle had worked there at one time, and the owner of this facility was one of the nicest to working men in the city. After all of that ugly strike stuff, he was kind enough to take them back in and employ them again. They got her a job as a scour. What this job was, you had these tongs, and you would use these tongs to dip the tin that had recently been fired, and you would dip it in this vats of acid to wash away debris. Then it would be taken out of that, and it would be dried off in sawdust, and then be sent on to be polished. And then you started the process all over again with a new piece of tin. Workday would have been standing about 12 hours. I can't imagine those vats of acid would have smelled very good. It was considered a really good job, though. Unfortunately, Kate, in 1861, was caught stealing from the plant. As she would go through the area where the finished products were dying, she would nick things, small things that she could put in her skirts or wherever she could hide things. Well, she got caught. There's a lot of people there. They can see you. She was fired. The family was appalled, and basically she was kicked out by Uncle William and Aunt Elizabeth. As a result, Kate walked 14 miles to Birmingham to live with her Uncle Tom. He was a shoemaker, and he was kind of cool. Another term for shoemaker was a snob. Uncle Tom was a bare-knuckle boxer for extra income. At this stage, he's getting up there in age. He's got to be in his 50s. Bare-knuckle boxers would have just wrapped their knuckles in something to protect them and went after each other. Sometimes the prize could be as much as 25 pounds. So he would want to do this as long as his body would allow him to. As in Wolverhampton, Kate takes a job in a tin factory. This time she is working as a polisher, that final step in the manufacture of these materials. Thomas Conway is a man who would become very important in Kate's life. He was born in 1836. He was Irish, and he joined the army in 1857. There was an uprising in India of British East Indian troops called the Sepoy Mutiny. He joined the army and was sent to put down this mutiny. When he got there, though, he started having problems on marches. He would be wheezing, he would be coughing, and it got so severe they ended up sending him to the hospital, where he was checked out, and it was determined that he would never get better. He had weak lungs potentially from a previous infection. He also had a heart ailment, and what was wrong with him was considered so bad that he was discharged from the army. Because of this, he did get a small pension. It was an honorable discharge. It would only be an income supplement. It would never replace an income. He had the unfortunate position, though, of not being able to do physical labor because of his condition. So he had to find something that he physically was able to do that wasn't a danger to his life. He chose a very interesting profession. He became a chapman. A chapman is basically a traveling salesman, but in addition to selling wares, it would be to people who lived out in the middle of nowhere and didn't have a store available. So they could buy scissors, thimbles, utensils, any of those regular everyday items you might need that you would get from the store. But you also could buy literature, some of it written by him himself. Now, he probably couldn't do this until he got together with Kate because he was illiterate and she wasn't. She probably helped him in this later on, but eventually it did get to the point where they would write their own songs and they would do performances in town for donations. And so it was kind of a jack of all trades. It was a nomadic existence going from this community to that community, generally walking. In 1862, he shows up in Birmingham. I guess there's some debate about where exactly they met. Uncle Tom swears it wasn't in Birmingham, basically a not on my watch sort of situation, while other people are adamant that they did meet in Birmingham. It kind of makes sense to me, given the timing, because after he left Birmingham, she followed, and he was headed back toward Wolverhampton, and she went back to Wolverhampton herself, basically following him. Her family loathed Thomas Conway. He was a man with no prospects. He didn't have a home. He had been rejected by the military. Like, this guy is a dead end, darling. He can't support you. And he hasn't asked you to marry him, and it doesn't seem like he's all that interested in doing so, which, by the way, he never does. Aunt Elizabeth and Uncle William say, unless this guy is out of here, you're out of here too. She basically said, okay, and she left with him. Now, by 1862, she is pregnant with her first child. And she joins him on the road. The feeling I get about Kate is that she was very theatrical. From what I was reading, it sounded like she was considered extremely fun. Uncle William complained that she liked to go out and party at night. She liked to drink, I think, even from a very early age. Thomas Conway was exotic. He was nomadic. He didn't answer to anyone but himself. He didn't have a boss. He didn't have to toe the line. He wasn't working, standing 12 hours a day, doing something menial. I truly think she liked that nomadic lifestyle. I think she really liked performing. They were partners in this chapmen business. He would sell items and she would stand and she would sing to passersby. He couldn't write, but she could. So when they wrote original material, she would write it down. I tend to think that because she had an education and he did not, that a lot of the written material may have come from her. I'm sure he probably helped, but wouldn't you think it would be easier with an education to write original material? She gave birth to her first daughter, Annie, on April 18th, 1863. Actually, having a baby, you would think it would slow them down, but actually, when the baby was really small, it would have come in handy because it would have pulled on people's heartstrings. Oh, look at the beautiful baby. I want to give you money. I want to buy things from you so you can feed that baby. January of 1866, she headed back home to Wolverhampton for a hanging. Now, hangings were big business for chapmen because they could write songs about it. They could sell the last words of the executed, and often these last words were already written down and being sold at the hanging. So yeah, the guy hasn't said his last words yet. So everybody gathers for a hanging. All these vendors selling trinkets. As I said, they would have sold songs. So they would have written lyrics and put it to the melody of a well-known song. And then you could give it to somebody and they could use these new lyrics to sing a new song. And it might be about a horrible murder or an execution. Well, at this particular execution, Charles Christopher Robinson, he was actually a distant cousin of Kate. I don't know if she knew him. His story was similar to hers in that he ended up being taken in by a relative as an orphan. And there was another young woman who was also taken in that he started a relationship with. And he ended up killing her in a lover's quarrel. The story about this event is probably the only thing that Thomas and Kate ever wrote that still exists. And I'm just going to read you the first verse of it. Come, all you feeling Christians, give ear unto my tale. It's for a cruel murder I was hung at Stafford jail. The horrid crime that I have done is shocking for to hear. I murdered one I once did love, Harriet Seeger dear. And it goes on to lament about how he's haunted about what he has done. His guilt doesn't allow him to sleep at night. It is a little bit sympathetic with him. It says over and over and over about how awful what he did was, but he feels guilty and it's a sad story. It doesn't make him out to be a monster. Well, this particular publication sells like crazy. They actually make enough from it for Thomas to buy a donkey, to buy a cart. She buys herself a flowered hat. it gets them a home for a little while. They actually are renting a place to live. They have 400 more of these printed to continue selling them. It's a very big seller for them, and that's why the Wolverhampton Archives still has a copy of it. So it was very popular and sold all over Wolverhampton, so one survived. That's how we have it. They start having more kids. Thomas is born in 1868, and then Harriet is born in 1869. It's getting hard to travel with this many children. So they settle, hopefully permanently, in London. This is where Kate's family is. She hasn't seen any of them for years since she was a 15-year-old teenager. So they come back, and she reconnects with her family. She sees her sisters. Their plan was to continue doing their peddling. But the market in a big city like London is very flooded. Thomas has no choice but to go back to physical labor, despite his illness. But it's never a permanent wage. He starts leaving London and traveling around trying to find work while she stays in London with the children. Things get so bad. They're all so malnourished. She isn't producing milk, and little Harriet starves to death. The first time they went to the workhouse was January 20th of 1871, when Annie was 7 and Thomas was 2. She has another child, George Alfred Conway, in 1875, another little boy named Frederick in 1876. When she's going to these workhouses, they still consider her basically a prostitute because she is not married to Thomas. They're a monogamous relationship. They are a long-term relationship. They have a family, yet that distinction is still made. Because they're not married, she's living in sin. Sometimes they would actually punish the women in these workhouses by giving them worse food, more watered down skilly, which it already was horrible. She wasn't eligible to get aid outside of the workhouse. Sometimes you could get aid like that without having to be inside the workhouse. And the workhouses were pretty good for the kids. They gave the kids a really good education. It was better than what Kate got at the Dowgate School. The education wing had all of these workshops and kitchens and dormitories. It had a working farm where kids could learn farm work. And they could actually practice these industrial skills they would need for later in life. Kate's siblings, who stayed at the workhouse and were educated there, did very well. If she had been younger and could have gone with them, who knows what her life could have been like. But one of her brothers became a musician in the army. The other brother learned how to make shoes, and her sister learned to do domestic work and ended up in service. Any child over 7 was taken from Kate after they checked in. When you get to the workhouse, you were separated by gender and by age. Women were in one wing, men in another, and children over 7 years old were taken to the school. They were able to see their parents once a week for a quote-unquote interview in the dining hall. I don't know if Thomas beat Kate the whole time they had a relationship, but around this time when he's coming home, her family is noting that she is showing up with her face disfigured from Thomas beating her. And as was common in the era, her sisters tended to blame Kate for the beatings. She's doing something to aggravate Thomas. She likes drinking, and he is a teetotaler. In 1876, she is arrested for being drunk in public. She spends 2 weeks in jail. This horrifies her sisters and her family. They're so embarrassed. Decent women don't get arrested for being drunk out in public. Or at least once, she showed up at Emma's door sobbing that her face was horribly disfigured from having been beaten by Thomas, and that she lamented, "I wish my life was like yours." Emma did not have a fancy life, but she did have a decent husband who did not lay hands on her. She had a roof over her head, even though it was small and cramped, but she still had something that Kate wished she did, which was stability and someone who cared for her and took care of her. Christmas of 1877 is the last time the sisters spend Christmas together. Thomas is there. Kate is there. She has 2 black eyes. Thomas shows absolutely no remorse whatsoever for having beaten Kate. He's also all over her. This visible affection, which the family found odd. Why is he beating her like this if he has this much love and affection for her? How can they have this much love and affection for each other when he treats her like that? I don't know, but he makes some comment to the effect of, "Someday I'll be hung for you, Kate." Nice guy, really nice guy. Well, whatever happens during this dinner, whether Kate gets smashed drunk or there's a big public fight, I don't know. But Harriet and Emma, her two older sisters, throw her out of their life. They have decided that she is just as bad as Thomas Conway, that they deserve each other. Get out of here, have fun. By 1879, little Frederick has died. They are again doing chapmen work, standing on street corners and singing and selling things. October 4th, 1879, they have two of their boys with them. Thomas is 11 and George is 6. Mom and Dad leave them on a street corner and say, we'll be right back. We're going to go do X, Y, and Z. The boys stand there for hours and their parents don't come back. They're taken to the Greenwich Workhouse where they have stayed many times while people try to find Kate. Kate is not found for a full week when she finally comes and picks the boys up. On November 11th, the very same thing happens. This time, the boys are in the workhouse for a full month, and Kate is never located. Their 15-year-old sister, Annie, has to come and get them and take them home. Now, Annie loses patience with her mother quite quickly as she grows up, and as soon as she hits old enough to be able to, she's out of there. She's arrested in 1881 again for being drunk and disorderly. Another sister cuts her off, her sister Elizabeth. The only sister Kate has left is Eliza. In 1881, she finally breaks up with Thomas Conway. She's had enough. She leaves him. Her family are relieved. Everyone's relieved. And she turns to the only sister she has left who still talks to her, and that is Eliza. Eliza has fallen on hard times herself. Eliza has become a widow. No arrangements had been made on how she would care for herself and support herself after her husband died. She has married again, but she is living in Whitechapel, in one of the most destitute neighborhoods. She's living at 6 Thrall Street. Kate goes to see her there. When she can't stay with Kate, though, she tries whenever she can, and she has the money. She has a lodging house called Cooney's at 55 Flower and Dean Street, which is literally right around the corner from her sister living on Thrall Street. Flower and Dean Street was considered a very extremely poor street, but she seemed to have a lot of fun at Cooney's. She was very well liked by the people that stayed there. She met her next common-law husband here at Cooney's. His name was John Kelly, and they seemed to have a really good relationship, although her family hated him even more than they did Thomas Conway. Yes, Thomas Conway beat her, but she had better living conditions, but she was always in the workhouse, so I'm really not sure what they're talking about. She stays with him, but he is an alcoholic just like she is, and they do this together. It's something they share, and that's probably one of the things her family hated so bad. Her daughter Annie certainly hated him. Annie cut her mother off officially after she had one of her children. She asked her mother to come help her, and Kate said, sure, but you have to pay me. Annie thought, okay, fine, I'll pay you. So she did, but then her mother took that money and went out and got wasted at the pub. And that was it for Annie. She'd had it. Her mother was constantly hounding them. She always showed up wanting money, begging, and they had just had enough. So she and her husband and their kids packed up, moved, and did not leave a forwarding address so Kate wouldn't know how to find them. She is with John Kelly for 7 years, up until her death. And that last night of her life is kind of hard to nail down because John was so drunk that he couldn't remember a lot of things about what happened when, and maybe sometimes he was just out and out lying about events to make himself look less irresponsible. They had just been out of town to Kent, and they had just returned. They went there. Every year people could come and help bring in the hop harvest and make some money, and food was provided and drink. They went pretty much every year, but that particular season, 1888, was terrible. The harvest was awful, and a lot of people, probably including them, had to come home without having gotten anything. They came home. They had 6 pence, which they completely wasted on alcohol. They either slept at 55 Flower and Dean Street, or they slept rough on the street, or they might go to the casual ward every now and then. Well, this particular night, they only had money for a bed for one of them. They even pawned his shoes to get the money for at least one of them to have a place to stay. For whatever reason, he took the room. I theorize it's because he had no shoes, but who knows? He felt a little bad about that, I think, and so he tried to say that he said she should take the room, and she said, no, I insist you take it. Either way, this is actually the night before she's killed. The next day, they're trying to figure out how to get money for that night, and she tells him that she's going to go ask her daughter for money. Well, she hasn't seen her daughter in 2 years. Her daughter cut her off in 1886, so there's no way that's true. But really, all she does is she just goes around the corner, and she ends up getting completely wasted on Aldgate and High Street at some pub. She probably encountered people who owed her drinks. I mean, it's a community of people who like drinking, and, you know, if someone said they owed her a drink, she's not going to turn them down. So she ends up in the pub and she never leaves. And she's found at 8:30 that night, so drunk, she is just lying in a heap on the street. A crowd has gathered. I read in one website that she was pretending to be a fire truck. I have no idea if that's really what was happening or if she was just lying there in a heap, passed out. But a crowd had gathered, and the policeman comes to see what's going on, and he asks if anyone knows her, and they say, no, we don't know her, which was probably not true. They'd probably helped some of them at least get her in that state. And at least one person ran off to tell John, hey, Kate's being picked up right now for being publicly intoxicated. Just FYI, that's where she's going to be. They take her to Bishopsgate Police Station. It requires 2 policemen because she cannot walk at all on her own, even with one guy assisting. They get her back there. They ask her what her name is. She slurs out, nobody. And they put her in there, just in the drunk tank, to let her sleep it off. Around 12:30 a.m., they start to hear her singing softly to herself. She really liked singing. She sang a lot at 55 and Dean Street. She would put on a show for people. She was a life of the party, apparently. Everyone loved her. Her friends thought she was fun to hang out with anyway. Around 1 a.m., she finally asks, when can I go? And they say something like, whenever you're able to take care of yourself. And she replies, I can take care of myself now. And he agrees to let her out. It's sad that he did. At 1 a.m., Elizabeth Stride is being murdered. Around the time she was being released from jail. She asked them what time it is, and he replies, it's too late for you to get another drink. As she says, basically, what time is it? And he says, it's just on 1. They ask her name. She gives a false name, a name that I find a little bit creepy. She says her name is Mary Ann Kelly, which the next victim's name will be Mary Jane Kelly. I find that creepy. Anyone else find that creepy? If you find that creepy, put it in the comments. She says that her address is 6 Flower Street, and they let her go. She wanders off into the night. She heads off in the direction to the last place that she saw John. And it's possible that initially that's what she was trying to do. I just need to find John. She doesn't seem to try that for very long, though, because she's found in a dark corner of Mitre Square where she probably curled up to go to sleep. She was still probably pretty drunk. I mean, when you're that drunk at 8:30 that you can't walk, or by 1 a.m., I wouldn't think you would be that much better. Able to walk now, but I don't think you'd be sober. So it's very possible she just decided to wait until morning to try to find him, found herself a corner, curled up. As she's heading toward Mitre Square, if the Ripper killed Elizabeth Stride, which to me, the biggest evidence that he had something to do with Elizabeth Stride is the timing and the location, because it was set up perfectly for them to meet there at Mitre Square. For him to just happen to run across a drunk woman who couldn't defend herself. And he did horrible, disfiguring things to her body after she was dead. The interesting thing about the Jack the Ripper case that I actually did not know when I first encountered this case was that it's likely that he strangled each victim before any of the throat slitting or any of the mutilations happened. And that's how there wasn't so much blood, because by the time he did that, they were already dead, and it kept blood from getting all over him, and it also kept the crime scenes from being just covered. It's a very intimate way of killing somebody as well. You're actually looking into their eyes as you kill them. And then, of course, the horrible mutilations he did to them. Catherine got it the worst of any of the victims we've talked about so far. And a lot of the explanation I have always heard is that if Elizabeth Stride is included as a victim, he was interrupted. And by being interrupted by someone coming across him struggling with her, if the man he saw was Jack the Ripper and not someone else who, because we don't know. Elizabeth Stride could have been arguing with someone she knew and then later encountered the Ripper within minutes. We have no idea. There are so many questions regarding this case. I think that's why people are still so interested in it. But he did horrible disfigurations to her face and also to her body. The next morning at 6 Thrall Street, the police came and they sent a little neighbor girl up to Eliza's room. And the little girl spoke with Eliza. Apparently Eliza was very ill with what, I don't know, but she told the little girl, I can't talk to anybody right now. I just feel awful. And they had to send the little girl back again to tell her, you don't understand, your sister has been killed and we need you to identify her body. It's not a very nice way of letting her know. They had this little girl do it. She still recognized her sister despite the damage to her face. She still found her recognizable. And when you look at her, she has very distinctive features, I think. Her forehead and her eyes, I think, would be very recognizable to someone who knew her very well. She was very slender. And of course, her hair looked like it was very curly, naturally curly. So there were a lot of things that could have been recognizable as her to someone who knew her really well. I'm including an image here that I found in a Reddit thread, and I absolutely want to give credit to the artist who did this. He goes by the handle Jacktheripperincolour. He colorizes the photographs, and I was able to take some of the images he did and put them in FaceApp and see the women smiling so that they look more, so that maybe we can tell what they might have looked like when they were alive. He also did a drawing of what Catherine Eddowes might have looked like based on the one really close up of her face. And it looks pretty close to me. Obviously, the nose is going to have to be largely a guess, but I think it looks very compelling. And I am including this here, and I want to give him credit where credit is due and hope that he is okay with me using this as an educational tool for you guys to see what this woman might have looked like in life. I feel somewhat of a kinship with her in how theatrical she was, how she loved singing. I have always loved theater myself. I love doing this. This to me is somewhat a little bit of theater of performance in entertaining you and educating you at the same time. So the fact that she traveled the country singing to people and bringing them joy and writing is really cool to me. Her end is so sad. Sad for all of them. She was 46 years old. She was actually one of the oldest of all of the victims. They were most all in their 40s except for victim number 5 coming up next week. We will be talking about Mary Jane Kelly, the Ripper's possibly final victim, but she is the final one considered in the canonical 5. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you giving me your time, and I hope to see you next week, and I would love to have you as a subscriber. I'll see you guys next time.